Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about identifying weaknesses in lifts and kind of returning back to some of our major movements and maybe how we can possibly identify what's holding us back from getting those numbers up a little bit higher and just making that athlete or ourselves a little bit stronger. And I'll be referring back to the concept that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So kind of chasing and pursuing our weaknesses. Please refer to the quotes in the upper left there, that the goal is to keep the goal the goal. I've said this before and I'll say it again, is that the goal is to keep the goal the goal. And what I mean by that and why I want to bring that into the conversation is that we have athletes who want to maybe win Olympic medals, or they want to score X amount of touchdowns, or they want to do so many different things, within sport. And sometimes we get caught up in pursuing things in the weight room. And I'm all for that. I love the weight room. I love that athletes come in and work hard. But what concerns me is that sometimes our athletes are going to kind of lose sight of what's actually their main goal. Because their main goal starts out as maybe win an Olympic medal or make varsity or whatever it is, or maybe lose weight, whatever they want to do. But pretty soon they're training so hard in the wrong direction, pursuing a sub goal in the weight room, that sometimes we're no longer really feeding into pursuit of that goal. So I'm going to kind of talk about that a little bit with the NFL scouting combine. And I just noticed how shiny I am. So I'm going to turn my light down a little bit, see if I can not blind you guys so much. I'm shiny today for whatever reason. All right, so let's look at the NFL scouting combine. I pulled up a list of their tests, and there's more. There's more. So start by just looking at the body, maybe pursuing the idea that someone who's 5'5" is maybe not going to be the best defensive end or linebacker. Maybe some extra height is going to help them catch and pursue the football, right? Certain things like the height and arm length help athletes kind of get to that position a little bit quicker. So as with many things, it kind of hurts it's a disadvantage to be short in this case. Now, if we were talking about who lives the longest and who's the healthiest and who's the best at maybe gymnastics, our shorter population kind of takes the lead. But when it comes to playing in the NFL, the height is going to be a big advantage. And then sometimes they're tall out of the sweet spot. So probably wouldn't want a 7-foot athlete trying to be a linebacker. Going to be a little bit harder to make change of direction happen and to be quick, things like that. Okay, so physical measurements, just to know kind of what you're dealing with body type wise, and then on to the 40-yard dash. Okay, the 40-yard dash, kind of a silly test, not really the best example of how someone's going to do on a football field. Why would we have linemen who weigh 340 pounds running 40-yard dashes when they're typically going to stay about a 5-yard block? Why go out and do that big test? It's just something that the history that I'm told that's kind of bled over is that they were looking at punt returns, and they noticed that a punt, if the average punt goes about 60 yards, with the hang time and the way that the time that it takes to get that ball to the receiver or to the punt return, and that they start running back towards the special teams, is that's about how far they'll run down to intercept and attack that receiver. So that's where the 40-yard dash comes from. Kind of applies to some of our special teams players, but not so much to our big guys who are playing on the line. But yeah, it's part of the combine. It's kind of part of the history, and it's sort of what you deal with. Does it have much to do with their sport? No, not really. But it's a good example of the goal not being the goal, because the goal is for NFL in this combine. The goal is for NFL teams to find football players who are going to help them win games and make money. The 40-yard dash, not highly not highly correlated to the tasks of a big lineman or of a quarterback or of many of the players on the field. Same thing goes for that bench press. And I'm not sure if I've badmouthed the bench press enough, but I want to take this special opportunity to badmouth the bench press. It's kind of a silly movement. It's fun, don't get me wrong. I enjoy it. I like it. I train it a little bit myself. It's not very applicable to sport. Not often, unless you're in trouble, are you laying on your back with a weight to push up off of you. And yet this is one of the most trained exercises in the gym all over the world, all over the USA, I'll say at least, a little bit more popular here. So the bench press, for whatever reason, is in the combine and kind of staying put. It's a big kind of, it's one of the big attractions to see how many times a guy can push 225 pounds. As you can see, QBs and wide receivers are exempt. Some of them are a little bit lighter. They're, often in football, you have bigs and skills. So your bigs would be your linemen, obviously, and then down into some of your linebackers and other positions. And then some of your skills would be maybe kickers, punters, wide receivers, quarterbacks, DBs, those kinds of positions. So some of the skills positions are just lighter individuals, and strength is not as big a part of their sport. So whereas the linemen who are locking into hand-on-hand combat up on the line, strength is a little bit more relevant. So the bench press, not only in football and the combine, is a little overvalued, but in a lot of our training and just the things we're talking about today in today's video, I talk about the bench press because it's an easy way to get the concepts across, and also because it's a super popular exercise that people are probably going to try to be training at anyways, whether I badmouth it or not. So let's go with the flow and let's talk about it. It is a good movement. It has value as far as developing arm strength and shoulder stability for the sports of wrestling, linemen in football, powerlifters, weightlifters, CrossFit athletes. For those athletes, it is a little bit more important, and it's going to play a bigger role. But if you're on the cross country team, really not that important. So we're talking about the bench press, but that's not because I think the bench press should be one of your top priorities. It's just for me, it's a good way to identify the concepts and talk about something that's probably going to be being used by most athletes anyways. All right, how about our vertical jump? Vertical jump, I think arguably the best test on here. If you're looking for what an athlete is actually able to do, a vertical jump is going to show you how your wide receivers and your DBs are actually able to go up and make an attempt on a football up in the air. And it's also going to correlate to linear speed, their ability to run from point A to point B. So vertical jump's great, whether you're big, small, basically any sport that is power based. Your vertical jump would be one of the first things I would test. Do you have a good way of testing it? Do you have a reliable way of testing it? Is another problem. So not going to talk too much about assessments or like the pieces of equipment they would use. But again, I'm a proponent for the vertical jump, and I would advise if you're testing anybody for anything, that might be a good one to put in. Very few, some, but very few injuries with the vertical jump. So maybe a little bit of a warm up for them. Try to heat them up and maybe ask about past injuries, knee injuries. But yeah, should be user friendly and injury free, but unfortunately sometimes it's just not. Broad jump is going to give you a lot of that same information. I'm a little bit less of a fan of the broad jump because of the torque and the forces that come with landing. I've broad jumped thousands of athletes and have only had one get injured landing on that eccentric phase as they come down. But since then, I've gotten to become a bigger fan of single leg broad jumps. So jumping off of one foot and landing on two. And this reduces your chance for injury and also gives you an idea of the disparity from one leg to another. When you get into things such as the 20-yard shuttle, you're getting some change of direction in there. You're getting some explosive component. You're also getting an idea of their mobility. Are they able to get low and into certain positions? So this is also known as the 5, 10, 5. Start in one line. They run 5 yards here. They turn back for 10 yards over here. And it's their goal is to finish through where they started. So 5 yards, 10 yards, other 5 yards. So yeah, that gives us low positions, explosive ability, their ability to just perform change of direction, which is more sport relevant. 3-cone drill is similar. It's going to go 5 yards forward, 5 yards out to the right. And then, so you go forward, back, and you go out around that cone, and then you finish through there. And then the 60-yard shuttle is just a shuttle. So give you an idea of kind of sprint endurance a little bit, but really just giving you an idea of their ability to produce power over a little bit of a duration. So all of these tests are good, but do they keep the goal? So if I'm all of a sudden the commissioner of the NFL, I'm probably going to change things up. So I'd probably change some of these tests. Again, I'm going to go on a bunch of tangents today. So I don't want to go on to a bunch of tangents exactly of what I would change it to. I would definitely keep that vertical jump in there. I would definitely take out the 40-yard dash. Not very common that an athlete is able to perform a 40-yard sprint on a football field in game. Pretty rare. And so to make athletes who have their careers, their athletic careers and their health on the line come out and run 40-yard dashes where hamstring strains and tears are way too common, I would shorten that up. I'd probably get what I want out of a 10 or a 20-yard sprint. With the technology we have, you can record that really well and get a good predictor and save some hamstrings. So I would save that 40-yard. Yes, I would still take a look at their body types. The bench press, I might keep that bench press, but I might go heavier and see where their strength is at, and see what or let's take an accelerometer and see what kind of weight they can move for what kind of speed, because that's what you're really doing. If you're using your hands in football and you're reaching out and punch another individual, you might be able to bench press 600 pounds, but if you got to take forever to do that, the play might be over by the time you've produced all of your strength. So you want somebody with some power to them. So maybe putting like a Tendo machine on there and seeing how fast they could bench press maybe their own body weight for, their average speed over 5 reps, something like that. Vertical jump, I would keep. Broad jump, I might change it over to that single leg to double leg landing. And then I do like that 5-10-5. I've grown to like that. So yeah, nobody's asking my opinion, but there's a little bit of what I would change. And then also to give some respect to this guy, who is Stephen Fay, or I think there's an H in there, but Pay or Fay or something like that. Anyways, he 225 pounds for 49 reps. Sheesh. That's a lot. Okay, so aside from keeping the goal, that is training in a way that's going to help us achieve our goal, like that NFL Combine we were just talking about. In the NFL Combine, what they'll actually do is they will, these young men will finish up their football seasons, maybe in November, December. They finish up their football seasons, and then there's going to be a draft. The NFL Combine will take place in March. And so what a lot of these athletes will do is whether they're done with their schooling or not, whether they have their degree that December of the end of their previous semester, what they'll do a lot of times is they'll find a training facility that specializes in NFL Combine training, and they'll go there in the first or second week of January, and they'll hang out for about 7 to 10 weeks of training to get ready for the NFL Combine. And what they're doing when they're training for the NFL Combine is they're no longer training to be football players. That's irrelevant in getting them a paycheck, and getting them a signing bonus, and getting drafted. What they're doing is going and training for the Combine. They're not training for football, they're training for the Combine. Does the Combine test what is going to prove and predict a good football player to be? Somewhat, but not really. It could be better, but theoretically it could be better. So the goal is to keep the goal. So if you are training the and you know what you're going for, and you believe that what you're training for correlates to your goal, then what you want to do is build up your weaknesses until they become your strong points. So if it's the 40-yard dash, maybe that doesn't necessarily make you a better football player. If I'm a 370-pound lineman, maybe running a 40-yard dash doesn't make me a better lineman. Maybe it's not going to help me get my second NFL contract, but it could help me get my first NFL contract if I need to get drafted from the results I produce in the NFL Combine. So my goal might temporarily be go be great at the NFL Combine, and then I'll do all the things I can do to get my 40-yard dash better. And then once the Combine's over with and I'm drafted, I don't really worry about that anymore. I worry about what I need to do to be the best lineman in the NFL that I can be. And Knute Rockne was a sort of an innovator in the game in the early years of football. Great athlete. Another great athlete who's an innovator is Louie Simmons. And if you don't know who Westside Barbell is, or what that facility is about, I'm gonna spend a moment here talking about it. If you do know Westside Barbell, kind of forwards and backwards, I would suggest skipping this slide. So Westside Barbell is the child, the baby of that man on the right there, Louie Simmons. And it was his goal to basically analyze what was holding lifters back in the sport of powerlifting and how to improve their weaknesses until they became stronger and until they had new weaknesses that needed to be addressed. So going out and learning from him, and they also put out a lot of information online. If you're interested in powerlifting, you may want to learn from them. And what he's done is he's basically made it an art form to identify who's getting stuck in certain spots and what they need to do to drive up their strength and to drive up their numbers. And so that's been his passion, his life's purpose, really. And from his collective crew of athletes, there's an athlete named Dave Tate, who I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about in the next few slides here. So Dave Tate was able to be a very successful lifter, and then has gone on to create a equipment company known as Elite FTS. And Elite FTS also has a website that produces and houses education materials and articles that are written by and for lifters. So what we're going to do today, well, we're going to talk about powerlifting and some of those bigger moments and how to identify and get those numbers up. So where's an athlete getting stuck and having trouble? And again, we are not concerned with making the best powerlifters in the world unless we're convinced that those lifts correlate to their goals. So if you have a soccer player or a figure skater, having a huge bench press, probably not that important. Maybe we want them strong in that movement to be, prevent injuries up top, or maybe it's a goalkeeper in soccer and we want to, build them up a little bit more up top. But we don't want to get so distracted in it that we start failing to invest time in their sport practice, things like that. So that's when it becomes an issue. So take me as a high school soccer player, doing pretty well with soccer and started enjoying the weight room, maybe a little bit too much, and focusing more and more on the weight room, lifting weights 4 to 8 times a week. And maybe my soccer practice, my time spent with a soccer ball and my time working on cardio started to get reduced a little bit towards the end of my soccer career. So would I have been a better soccer player with a little bit less strength training and a little bit more ball work, and maybe watching game film or doing more cardiovascular endurance type of activities? Probably, but my goals shifted. My goals shifted from playing college soccer to growing more muscular and pursuing some weightlifting goals and some sort of bodybuilding goals. So the goal is to keep the goal, and we want to chase our weaknesses. All right. Stop chasing your tail with the big lifts. Okay, and again, we're talking about the squat, bench, and deadlift today. Is that because those are the best lifts to make athletes? Are they the best lifts for anything besides powerlifting? Maybe. No, I don't know. That's kind of up to you and your philosophy. But they're common. They're frequently used. So we're going to talk about them. And the principles that we talk about today can just apply to any other lift or activity that you want to do. So that's why I'm not too worried about talking about them. What I mean by chasing your tail with the big lifts is that, let's talk about 2 principles. The principle of specificity. If I want to get better at squatting, what should I do? I should go squat. But the principle of variation is that sometimes doing other things helps you become better at the main thing. If I'm squatting for several months in a row and I'm plateauing and struggling and not getting stronger or better or anything along those lines, maybe another squat day isn't going to help me out. What do I need to address? What's my big weakness? think about that weak link in the chain. If you're squatting, chances are that your core, your midsection is your weak link. But let's say we solve that. Let's say we've got an incredibly strong core. Louis Simmons will say that the West Side barbell lifters have the strongest core in the world. So let's say we're squatting and we somehow get our core to not be the weak link. Let's say we do. We've got a very strong core midsection and we're wearing a belt and maybe a squat suit as well. We're really supportive. The core is not your weakness. You've got a new weakness. What is it? Is it your quads, your glutes, your hamstring? Is it your mobility, your ability to handle loads through a bigger range of motion? Is it just your technique? Once was, at the head of a class and kind of on the same subject matter, and I had a younger lifter a student who's in the class kind of raise his hand and say, well, your technique is always going to be your limiting factor. And it kind of caught me off guard a little bit. But I really kind of brought it back to him and was like, well, what happens once your technique is perfected? Why couldn't you squat 1,000,000 pounds if your technique is perfect? Which I don't know how many people would say their technique is perfect. Probably all the people whose technique is perfect or near perfect, they probably wouldn't say that's perfect. Whereas a lot of novices might say, sure, it's perfect. But once your technique is perfect or near perfect, there's going to be a chain somewhere in the link, or a link somewhere in the chain of muscles from your toes up to your nose, basically, that's weak, that's holding you back from maybe squatting 200 pounds or 600 pounds or 1,200 pounds. So with chasing your tail with the big lifts, I would encourage us to think about what the weak link is. Understand that oftentimes more squatting will grow a bigger squat, but after so long, you need to do something else. You need to find, okay, what's that weakness? It's your core. All right, let's resolve that. Let's get that core stronger. If you're really pursuing heavier numbers, maybe you start wearing a belt or squat briefs. But then you're going to have a new weakness arise. And if you don't think your core is your weakness, do a heavy squat and then go do a heavy leg press. Most leg press machines are going to allow you to do somewhere around twice as much weight as you do on a squat. And what's the biggest difference? It's that your core is not engaged. You're often laying flat against a padded surface. So we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But again, don't chase your tails. Let's learn to identify sticking points and weak spots within our range of motion and how to make those weaknesses strong until we have new weak points, and then we start pursuing those weaknesses. Before we dive into more powerlifting, I just wanted to bring up the idea that the bench, squat, and deadlifts are just some common movements, but we have so many that we can pursue and try to improve. And the same concepts and principles that we're going to talk about for our squat, bench, deadlift are applicable to all of these other movement patterns. And it's these other movement patterns, they're going to be a little bit more important for your typical athletic development, or maybe just daily life. So grandmas or soccer moms, or I'm a has-been high school athlete who's a father of two now. So I got to watch out for getting that dad bod. So maybe I've got the dad bod and I come to you and I say, help me. And these are some of the movement patterns that you would focus on. It's not so much just the squat, bench, deadlift, but some of these other things could also be tested and challenged and used for training, but then also analyzed to see how we move and to see little weak spots that could be improved. Okay, good news is I'm not going to read through this, but I am going to just relax for a second while you guys take a look. So I have borrowed these bullets from a manual from the University of Missouri. There was a staff in place back in 2012 when I went and did an internship there. And they provided us with some information on how they want to coach the squat. So this is something that I just always sort of refer back to. And it's one of my favorite items that I have on paper for educating or instructing the squat. And I also included a video, which is going to be about 12 to 18 minutes. It's by a lifter and a researcher named Layne Norton. And he spends those 12 to 18 minutes, I can't remember exactly how much on that video, explaining how to perform the squat and demonstrating it. So if you're in this course, I think you might know some of these items, but I wanted this to be a good refresher. I want to provide these resources for you. And I thought I would spare you watching me perform squats. So if you want to watch some squats getting performed, I would encourage you to pursue that link down at the bottom there. Layne Norton on squatting. All right, gonna move on. So if you want to keep reading through it, pause it now. Okay. I spoke about Dave Tate earlier. He's one of the lifters who came out of Louie Simmons Westside Barbell and is the owner and operator of Elite FTS. And at the bottom there, you can see a link. And what he did is he created a squat manual. He wrote an article, basically how to squat and how to fix and strengthen your squat. So if you look at my chart here, let's look at our weak point. The possible reason that is a weak point and a possible solution. So again, maybe referring back to that conversation I had with a lifter and a student a few years ago. Yes, technique is very important and it should always be the top priority, but there's always going to be a weakness somewhere in the chain. So you do some technique work, you do some strengthening work, and hopefully you end up being stronger and better. Again, if it's not a weak link holding you back, then all you had to do was work on form, and there'd be a lot more people who squat 1,000 pounds walking around. And just to rattle off a few things here, if your weakness or your weak point is falling or failing forward, then you'd want to look at the weak abs and low back, and you'd want to strengthen those. What if you're getting stuck at the bottom? Possible reason is you're putting on more weight than you're really capable of, which is funny to say out loud, but think about athletes or lifters who, they say, let's go with 315 pounds. And really they have no business squatting more than 250 pounds. Yeah, that weight's going to ride them to the bottom and it's going to keep them there. So oftentimes, if you're just not hitting loads, a lot of people get it in their heads that I should be able to do 135 pounds or 225 pounds or 500 pounds. I should be able to. And then they miss it and then they try again. Well, every time you try again, your chances for injury skyrocket. So if you're not hitting your weights, lighten the load. Maybe the programming is off. Maybe you had a bad night of sleep the night before. But you don't want to go down and get buried on a regular basis. That's dangerous and it's unproductive. Another reason you might get stuck at the bottom is that your stance is too narrow. So a narrower stance can often be a little bit better for maybe like a bodybuilder, someone who wants to grow their quads and grow some bigger quads. But if you're looking to make stronger hips or to lift more weight, a wider stance is going to help your hips get engaged a little bit more. It's also going to shorten the distance that you need to move the weight. So just a reminder that work equals force, force times distance. So if you want to do more work, then you want a long stance. You want a narrow stance and a long range of motion. So you can do more work that way, but you're not necessarily going to lift more weights. So if you shrink your distance, your work would lower. But if you shrink your distance and then are then able to handle more weight, your workload might stay the same. It might go up. So it could be a good thing. And even if it doesn't pay off with the principle of variation, you might just use different squat stances in different phases. So just something to think about. Getting down low in that hole in the bottom of your squat, that's when the hamstrings are really called on and activated. So if you are getting way down deep in there and your hamstrings are weak, you're not going to get any assistance. But if you've got strong hamstrings, they're going to fire and engage and help you get out of the hole and back up to the top. Getting stuck 3/4 of the ways up, weak glutes, hips, strengthen them. Some examples would be good mornings, hip thrusts, glute bridges. And you might be strong, but you might not have muscle activation. So glute activation, engagement. Think about maybe a little kid showing you their bicep and they don't flex it because they don't know how. Not only do they not have muscle mass there, but they also don't have the ability to flex that muscle. So a lot of lifters are the same way. As you tell them to squeeze their glutes, and then they kind of can at the top, but they're not really able to do that at the bottom. So something to think about, something to work on. Knees buckling in would be, again, weak glutes and hip rotators. And, I just say technique. It should be a technique. You can also coach technique, just like you incorporate exercises to grow muscles. You might incorporate coaching cues such as spread the floor. I forgot my other little apostrophe there. So like spread the floor, telling them to drive their feet apart as if they're trying to, if they're standing on a mat, like they're trying to rip the mat in half with their feet. So that's the squat, identifying weaknesses. If you want to dive into that a little bit more, I would highly recommend clicking on that link below, typing it in, however you're going to get there. Dave Tate does a great job writing that up. Pretty easy to go through and analyze and learn a lot. Okay, moving on to the bench press. Kind of did the same thing here. And I'm going to talk a little bit less as we go through the bench press and the deadlift, because I'm sort of following the same pattern that we just went through with the squat. So if you guys want to read through this, I got these same bullets from that Mizzou internship manual in 2012. Thanks to Brian Mann, he was the head of the internship program then. And if you want to watch Lane Norton perform the bench press, he's a very successful powerlifter and bodybuilder and researcher. So he's a stud. So I put that link in there if you want to see Lane Norton move some weight and kind of talk about how he does it. Sorry, I didn't give you the warning. All right, we're going to move on. So pause it now if you'd like to. Okay, the bench press, identifying weaknesses. Again, look down the bottom there. This is pulled from an article from Dave Tate. I'm just going to buzz through it real quick now that you guys kind of know how to use this little cheat sheet I typed up. Again, technique, top priority, but there's going to be a physical weakness somewhere in the chain. And one thing I haven't talked about is that partial reps. So if you're getting stuck halfway up, you might want to do overweight squats to that halfway point. It's not going to just quickly solve that issue, but it is a method for attacking that weak point. So I didn't bring that up for the squat. I just want to bring that up real quick. With the bench press, let's say you're weak off the chest. Again, maybe the bar's too heavy. Lowering the bar with the back. So that kind of blows a lot of people's minds when you start talking to them about that your bench press, you might actually use your back quite a bit. And again, it's basically your foundation. So your back is on the bench. You want your back nice and tight, and you're going to pull that bar down towards you. And then you can actually flex and activate your lats at the bottom while you're activating all of your anterior chain muscles, such as your pecs, your shoulders, and then your triceps. So for all your normal pressing muscles, but using your back as well. It's kind of a sneaky little way to get more done. And you might just be too slow. So you might want to develop some accelerative strength. So doing fast bench pressing. We will talk about velocity-based training in the future, not too much today. But if you just want some quick advice on how to do that or what to do, look at that link below. Go down and see the percentages that are suggested and try it out. If you're getting stuck halfway up, it might be your triceps. Oh, there's a typo. You know what? Stronger hamstrings probably going to help your bench press, but for our purposes, strengthen your tries. Technique wise, a coaching cue that you might use would be spread the bar. So trying to pull that bar apart. And as you do that, you're activating more muscles. One of the easiest ways to get stronger is to use more muscles. I know that's kind of a silly, simple thing to say, but why bench press with just your pecs and shoulders and a little bit of triceps when you could be using a lot of triceps, your back, your rear delts, your anterior delts, your pecs. You know, the more muscles you throw at that bar of weight, probably the easier the bar is going to get moving. And then another cue would be keep elbows tight to torso. So as those elbows flare out, you're going to get a lot more stress in the shoulder. And for me in particular, I've got these little baby shoulders. But in comparison to some of the bigger muscles, even big shoulders are still small compared to pecs and lats, and they're just not as strong as triceps. So I would encourage most athletes to sort of deviate away from a pec and a shoulder-based bench press method, but to get their elbows in tight and to use those triceps to make the triceps in the back do the bulk of the work. If you can get the triceps in the back doing the bulk of the work, you're going to have a longer lifting career because less stress on the shoulder, and the bench press would actually apply to the sporting world quite a bit more, because when you're out pressing on the line, you don't want to do a big, nasty, wide press that looks like a chest fly, because you'd be slow, you'd be weak, and chances are you'd get hurt. You'd want to have your arms and elbows in tight, where it's very stable, where you can be quick, and where you can be very strong. And the same thing goes for our wrestlers, is that those hands, that when they're hand fighting, they're in close and tight. They're not doing this, although sometimes they do slap the other guy or gal. I'm not advising that. So I would advise a bench press with the elbows in a little bit tighter, for most lifters, but obviously that goes back to just being part of my own philosophy, being someone with crummy shoulders, and just based on things that I've seen. And again, if you want to get that bench press up, you may benefit from checking out Dave Tate's article that I've linked at the bottom. Not much to say here. Got the bullets from the same internship manual. Take a look at them for the deadlift here. That link is another link to a Lane Norton video of him coaching and demonstrating the deadlift. I'm going to move on. So if you want to read through a little bit more, take a moment now. All right, moving on. Same thing. Let's jump through this chart real quick. Technique, top priority, but even with awesome technique, you're still going to have some weakness. Coming up off the floor, maybe a weak upper back. So if you want your core to stay solid and you're going to pull on that bar and the upper back breaks, well, it kind of causes a domino effect, and it's really hard to find the strength below that. So keep that upper back real tight. And then your deadlift is going to really challenge the spinal erectors. So strengthen those with good mornings, RDLs, extensions, and weak hamstrings. Being weak at the shin. So let's say you get that bar up off the ground, and then 6 to 9 inches up off the ground. It's kind of slowing down and gets up by your shins. It's not going anywhere. Well, what that probably means is that you're too slow. So maybe some speed work, maybe using some accelerative strength. Again, not going to dive into that today, but if you just want to jump ahead, maybe go watch that velocity-based training video, or check out the link below with some advice from Dave Tate. Weak at the shin. So it could also be weak abs and low back. Again, you notice that theme there. I really tried to find an article that I read a while back that talks about how similar the bench press, squat, and deadlift are, and how similar the core positions are within each movement, and why getting really good at one will probably bleed over into the other two. So I tried to find that article. I wanted to bring it in here and at least offer the link to it. But basically, to summarize it, is that if you get a really strong upper back, it's going to improve your bench press. It's going to give you a better foundation for the bar to sit on for your squat. And it's going to help you pull that bar off the ground when you deadlift. If you get really strong core, belly, and low back, it's just going to make you super stable and allow you to express strength in all three movements. So I'll leave it at that. And then if you're pulling up that deadlift and you get weak at the knees, it's probably your glutes and your hip rotators. So strengthen your glute max. So remember, it's your glute med that causes external rotation. It's a hip rotator. And it's your glute max that causes hip extension. So just pushing your hips forward at the top of, or as the bar gets to those knees. So I'm just going to kind of end with the fact that the goal is to keep the goal the goal. If you want to be a ballerina or a mountain bike racer or whatever, using big movements to get stronger is a great idea, but they don't have to be the barbell-based powerlifting movements. And if they are, maybe be conservative in that a squat is probably going to help a soccer player more than a bench press is going to help a soccer player. Just keep in mind that what you're training for is actually feeding into what your goals are. Now, there's exceptions to that, like when football players, they train for the combine so that they can get paid to go play football. Being better at the combine does not necessarily mean you will be better at football. In fact, there's some great stories of some freak athletes who just go and produce awesome numbers at maybe the combine, not so much the combine, but at a pro day where it's combine testing on a smaller level, and without so many cameras and video, what do you call them? Videographers or video crews. But sometimes there's freak athletes that just go in there and they look good and they perform good at the combine, but then it's time to play football. And, they got that first contract to get in there and then you never see them again. So I would just encourage you that the most important thing, while we always want to be training our weaknesses and improving our movement ability and our strength levels, the goal is to keep the goal. Be very wary of training people in ways and for things that are not going to help them achieve their goals. All right, I believe that is it. Have a great day.